Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Now let's move to the directive principles of the state policy. It is specially the Indian constitution that it directs the union and the states to keep certain guidelines, and these guidelines are meant uh, as the policy formation so that they can ensure equality and well-being of all the citizens. But these are not these were not legally forceful in earlier time. So this means that if a government did not implement of a particular guidelines, we cannot go to the court of the implementation of the policy. So these guidelines are non-justificable, and that is part of the constitution that cannot be enforced by the judiciary. And besides, the expected that the people would also hold the government responsible for implementing these directives, so a separate list was made. Nature and characteristics of the directive principles, non-justifiable rights of the people. Like if we talk about the, it is a speciality of the Indian Constitution. It directs the union and the states to keep certain guidelines and ideals before them at the time of policy formulation, and so that they can ensure equality and well-being of all the citizens. But they were not made legally enforceable. So this means that if a government did not implement a particular guideline, we cannot go to the court for implementation of that policy. And directive principles of state policy, non-justifiable rights, like Part 4 of the Constitution lays down the directive principles of state policy. And a separate list of policy guidelines is included in the Constitution, and the list of these guidelines is called the directive principles of the state policy. And the directive principles are in the nature of guidelines or instructions that tell the legislature and the executive what to do, and they serve as a beacon light to the legislature and the executive what to do. And they serve as a beacon light, courts as well. And in the directive principles, one find a clear statement of socialist in Gandhian principle and the ideals of the welfare state. And it is relating to economic and socialistic policies also. That means economic policies, socialist policies, educational policies, administrative policies. So there are different policies. I'll explain you a few of them. The relating to economic socialist policies in the Indian Constitution, the directive principles have been mentioned in respect of this policy. Every citizen of India, man and woman, should have ample opportunity to earn livelihood. The state should work in the direction, and the state shall ensure that the material resources of community are owned and distributed in such manner that it ensures collective welfare and is applied for the public good. And the state will protect the children in their tender age from the material and moral exploitation, and the state, within the limits of its economic capacity and development, will make provision for securing the right to education, to work, and public assistance also. And according to social and educational policies, the state shall endeavor to provide for, within a period of 10 years from the commencement of the Constitution, and free and compulsory education for all the children up to age of 14 years. And when this is provided, all children will get free and compulsory education. And the state will try to frame a uniform civil code as well. And if I relate it to the alternative policies, so the state will ensure the legal system and will work in such a way that everybody gets justice through equal opportunities. It will see that nobody loses his opportunities, and they should be treated equally. And relating to international peace as well, India has always contributed to the maintenance of world peace and security, and that is why the farmers of the Constitution kept in view not only the problems of the country but also the problems of establishing peace and security in the world. Now, how the directive principles were implemented, like right to education came into force on 1st April 2010, and then it was because it became a fundamental right of all the citizens of the age of 6 to 14, and welfare schemes. The weaker section are being implemented by the government, which provides free textbooks or students belonging to SCs and STs pursuing medicine and engineering courses. And in order the SCs and STs are fully protected from the atrocities of the government enacted, the Prevention of Atrocities Act and several land reform acts were enacted to provide ownership rights to poor farmers, and the Equal Remuneration Act 1976 provides for equal pay for both men and women for the same work or a work of a similar nature. And the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that NREGA, now named after Mahatma Gandhi, required provide 100 days of employment in a year to each rural household to the country during 2013-14. Nearly 4.98 crore households were provided employment under Rural Employment Scheme. And under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana (PMJDY), it was made possible for all, especially the poor, to have banking opportunity as well as insurance coverage, which previously they did not have. And judiciary has been separated from the executive in all the states and union territories except Jammu and Kashmir and Nagaland. Panchayat Raj now covers almost all states and union territories. The main principles underlying India's foreign policy are peaceful coexistence, disarmament, and fight against colonialism and racialism. Now let's talk about the fundamental duties. Fundamental duties of the citizens of India. What the fundamental duties are? The original constitution introduced in the year 1950 did not mention fundamental duties of a citizen. At that time, it was hoped that they would fulfill their duties willingly. The hopes of the framers of the constitution were fulfilled, and to some extent, but in 1976, the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution added a new list of duties. And there are 10 duties which are as follows, like to abide the Constitution, and respect the idols and institutions, the national flag and the national anthem, to cherish and follow the noble ideals which inspired our national struggle for freedom, and then to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity, and to defend the country and render national service when called upon to do so, to promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood amongst all the people of India, to value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture, to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lake, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures, to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry, to reform, to safeguard public property and to avoid violence, to strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collectively activity so that the nation rises to high levels of achievement, to provide opportunity for education to children between the age of 6 and 14 years, and this duty was inserted by Constitution 86 Amendment Act 2002. Now, the relation between the fundamental rights and directive principles. Fundamental rights and directive principles are complement to each other, and fundamental rights train the government from doing certain things, while directive principle exhorts government to do certain things. Like the very first thing, if we say, is quote, enforce fundamental rights and not the directive principles. The basic distinction between the fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy is that the fundamental rights are defended by law, and whereas the directive principles are not defended by the law. But this is not true. In case of directive principles of state policy, they are beyond the jurisdiction of the court, and if the government do not formulate the basis of these principles, then the judiciary cannot force the government to do so. Then the fulfillment of directive principles based upon morality also. Because the representatives elected by the people during general election have the moral obligations to ensure the directive principles are implemented through the policies of the government, and actually the government is directed by the constitution to keep in view these directive principles. While formulating its policies, if the government realize its moral obligation, then citizens will receive all privileges and the implementation of these directive principles. Directive principles depend basically to public opinion as well, because in the democratic country, no government can ignore the public opinion, and if the government ignores it, then directive principle, the public opinion will go against it. And the scope of the directive principles is wider than the fundamental rights because they are linked with the citizens of the country. Its scope is limited up to the country, and the effect of the achievement of these rights is felt on the citizens. But the impact of the directive principles is wider. Fundamental rights are for the citizens and directive principles are for the state. And the fundamental rights are guaranteed to citizens. They are meant for citizens, but directive principles are meant for the state. And fundamental rights can be suspended, whereas directive principles cannot be suspended. As this is the biggest difference between two, that directive principles cannot be suspended, and fundamental rights can be enjoyed fully one during peacetime, but in emergency they can be suspended as well, but which is not for directive principles. The conflict between the fundamental rights and the directive principles, there may be a conflict between these two. Like ordinarily, directive cannot take precedence over fundamental rights, as in the fundamental rights are justiciable. They are treated as being more important than the directive principles. And one more thing, people can enjoy fundamental rights at fully, but at the time of emergency, they can be suspended, but directive principles cannot be. And in the opinion of the Supreme Court, the directive principles have to conform to and run as subsidiary to the chapter on the fundamental rights. And the general welfare should prevail over the individual rights. The Supreme Court upheld the abolition of zamindari since the measure was for a public purpose, and similarly it ruled the Minimum Wages Act was in order, payment of less than the minimum wages is violative, and of the directive principles which says that the state shall strive to minimize the inequalities in income, and these and other decisions of the code undermine the principle that general welfare shall prevail over the individual right. That's all for the chapter. Let's have a look on what we have done. So let us revise. Who can make amendments in the fundamental rights? A union parliament. Who is a beggar is a practice where the worker is forced to do work for the master free of charge at a nominal wage. And the characteristic of the right against exploitation, child labor, human trafficking, manual scavenging, and forced labor are prohibited under this right. And under which article of the Constitution the fundamental rights can be suspended? It can be suspended under Article 359. And fundamental rights are absolute? No, they are not. And right to equality is mentioned under Article 14 to 18. An article of the Constitution of untouchability is Article 17, and right to liberty is mentioned under Article 19 to 22. And term fundamental right means the legal rights stated in the Constitution are called fundamental rights. These rights are considered essential for the development of an individual. Citizens in India, Japan, America, Russia, and Switzerland enjoy fundamental rights. And the rights which are given in the Constitution are right to equality, liberty, exploitation, religious freedom, culture and education, and constitutional remedies. And what is the meaning of writ of quo warranto? The writ of quo warranto is used to prevent illegal assumption of any public office or usurpation of any public office by anybody. For example, person of 60 years is appointed to fill a public office, whereas the retirement age is 55. Now the appropriate High Court has a right to issue a writ of quo warranto against the person and declare the office vacant. And why are fundamental rights enumerated in the Indian Constitution? Fundamental rights are included in the Constitution to uphold the dignity of the individual. The object of enshrining fundamental rights in the Constitution is to sustain the proposition that the system of government recognized by the Constitution embodies the concept of limited government, that is, a government of laws and not of men. Another very important reason for the inclusion of fundamental rights in the Constitution of India is to create a climate of trust and confidence in the minds of minorities living in the country. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Please use this video as a support material. Hope these questions will help you to clear the concept. Have a wonderful time.